Okay, so thank you all for coming today for BHN special office hours. Today, it's an intersectional talk between IDD and IDEA, which for us stands for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access. So I'll go ahead and introduce our four really amazing guest speakers before we get started. So first we have Joan Medlin, who is a registered dietitian. Joan focuses her work on coaching people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, their families, and those who support them to create quality lives, quality health, and a community vision. She's authored many different books and articles and educational tools, including the Down Syndrome Nutrition Handbook, A Guide to Healthy Lifestyles, which is the first book to really look at healthy promotion or health promotion for people with Down syndrome. She's also published Cooking by Color, Recipes for Independence, a collection of recipes for people with IDD looking to live on their own. She's received many awards, including the Theodore Josem Award for the National Down Syndrome Congress, the NDSC Exceptional Meritorious Service Awards, Award of Excellence from the Global Down Syndrome Foundation, and Excellence in Practice for Behavioral Health Nutrition from the Academy, as well as the Legacy of Excellence Public Advocacy Award from Kansas State University School of Human Ecology. So many awards, but what she really cares about is seeing people discover and grow to lead more healthful lives more. So advocacy, collaboration, and forward change for systems are really important for her. And she lives in Oregon with her adult son and her husband. Her adult son experiences Down syndrome, autism, epilepsy, and celiac disease. We also have June Thompson, who is also a clinical dietitian and a consultant for Family Affair Care Group, Inc., which provides services to adults with intellectual disabilities. She's also a renal dietitian with Fresenius Kidney Care, and she has been for the past 33 years. During her career, she's taught different classes in nutrition at NC State University, where she is a proud alumna, and she obtained her BS in home economics with a specialty in clinical nutrition, as well as her MS in foods and nutritional sciences. June's also the current chair of NOBIDON, the National Organization of Blacks in Dietetics and Nutrition. And she received the NOBIDON YAM Award in October 2020, and she was voted Dietitian of the Year in 1996 by the National Kidney Foundation. In her personal life, she's married to Tony L. Thompson. They've been together for 40 years, and they're the proud parents of 2 adult children, Kenya Danielle and Tony Lee II. We also have Audrey Rohn, who is a disordered eating specialist and a registered dietitian. And for the past 4.5 years, she's overseen nutritional services for over 200 children with developmental and physical disabilities, demonstrating disordered eating patterns. So in addition to supporting families and caregivers for clients between 0 and 17 years old, she collaborates with OT, speech, physical and developmental therapists to optimize nutrition outcomes. So her experience includes clients with autism spectrum disorder, cerebral palsy, severe prematurity of birth, food allergies, tube feeding needs, sensory processing disorder, Prader-Willi syndrome, Down syndrome, speech delays, global developmental delays, and that's not even all of it. While providing behavioral therapy in 2017, her eyes were open to the need for mealtime support in the autism community related to eating disorder behaviors. She's conducted online parent trainings, individual and group therapy sessions, all while building an early intervention caseload. She's a sequential oral sequencing or SOS approach informed therapist with 2 out of the 3 requirements completed to become an SOS certified feeding therapist. And last but certainly not least, we have Marguerite Hay, neurodiversity teacher and consultant joining us all the way from England. She is the founder of the Big E which was born out of Marguerite's passion and frustration for disabled children not receiving the provision that they're entitled to. So the Big E is an assessment and advocacy service where they pride themselves on providing a tailored service to each person that they work with. So they use all parts of a person's identity, their academic and lived experience to ensure that they advocate fully for everyone. And with a cultural understanding, they really work to increase disability awareness among racialized groups. They work with all families to ensure that they're aware of their rights and that they have the provisions that they're entitled to. And they're knowledgeable in the UK SEND legislation, working with several organizations that are championing racial and social justice, and are also passionate about building meaningful relationships with parents, young people, and professionals alike. So, wow, you can see we have 4 amazing guest speakers that are incredibly qualified and really passionate. So I'm really excited to have you guys here today. And if you guys are ready, I can go ahead and start with the first discussion question. I realize I didn't really introduce myself, but I'm Marissa Black, and I'm the IDEA liaison for the BHN. So I just wanted to throw that out there real quick. But our first question is, in your experience, what are some of the challenges and inequities that you've seen people with intellectual and developmental disabilities face? So very broad, it might take a while to just cover this one question. Let's see, I think June's lit up first, but Marguerite's got her hand. See, June, did you want to start?
Well, I can. Thank you so much for having me here today. One of the things that makes me, of course, very sad is folk having access to the care that they need at whatever level it is. And because sometimes they don't even have an advocate to speak for them. For example, 2 of the clients I have are brother and sister. They don't know they're even brother and sister because of, where they are. And their mom left them, abandoned them in the hospital. And so their advocate is a person, that is of the state. They don't have a family member to even come check on them and to work with them. They are blessed to be with a really good situation, a group home, the company that I work for, because they honestly care about the patients. If it was a larger setting, would they get the individual care and someone who can speak individual to their needs? I'm not so sure, because they can get lost in the system so easily and just become a client that is cared for, but really isn't seen the way they need to be seen, and their individual needs to be addressed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Marguerite, I saw you nodding your head. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
All of what Jane says. So I would say, in addition to that, a lack of understanding about the condition. So I don't know what it's like in the US, but here I know that when my daughter was diagnosed, it was a leaflet. Now, thankfully, because I'd done a master's in autism, I was able to explain. It was me that pushed for the diagnosis, actually, because I could clearly see that she was definitely autistic. But most young people get the diagnosis, or the child gets the diagnosis, and the parents get a leaflet, and then they're kind of left by themselves. So they have no understanding of the condition, how it affects that young person and the extended family. So I would say, in addition to June, absolutely. The lack of culturally appropriate services as well, definitely. Making services that are culturally competent for the service, the families that they serve, with the cultural differences that are there. In addition to that as well, disability is still missing from debates. It's still missing for meaningful conversations to be had, that we can get change, that disability is seen as part of our community and as part of life. They're not locked away, that you can go to your, not just your supermarket or just your cultural centre and see people like that, but in all walks of life, lawyer, teacher, all of walks of life. and also how disability is viewed now. Here, we are really trying to move to the social model of disability, rather than the medical model of disability, where we're seeing it as deficits. So in terms of the social model separates the distinction between disability and impairment, so that it's seen disability is framed as a social construct, rather than something that the disabled people are still oppressed in terms of seeing that. So it is seen in a different way. We're trying to move towards that social model of empowerment.
So I'm going to step in. I'm just going to go ahead and go, not make you ask me. I think Marguerite brings up some really important points. I'm going to point out that I'm the salty old one of the bunch here. So my experience with disability actually goes beyond my career. It goes into my childhood. My mother was one of the first early intervention teachers in Oregon. So I've been around people with intellectual and developmental disabilities since I was about 7. And what I have seen across my lifespan is that change from when I was young, they were still sending people to our institution, which no longer exists. We're one of 15 states with no institution in the state. But we've gone from that, and we've swung all the way over to a community-based care model where people are living, hopefully, in their family homes. And Oregon is providing supports now since 2014 from birth to death for folks who qualify for intellectual and developmental disability services, regardless of your financial structure. So if you're born to a family who's middle class, you still can have those presumptive Medicaid eligibility as an adult for that child. Having said that, June brought up how you're just sort of sent out there on your own to kind of figure it out. And we're supposed to be honing in on that intersectionality of intellectual and developmental disabilities and racial issues, right? So I want you to think about that and think about how there's been a lot of press, not that we're all good at it yet, but that we're becoming more and more aware of how culture suppresses certain or creates, how do I want to say this? We have all of these racial inequities that are inherent in our system. Okay. Now, if you're a person with developmental disabilities, intellectual and developmental disabilities, there's an additional piece there that goes against everything that you need to thrive. And that is that our culture is based on compliance. And for me, the word compliance is a 4-letter word.
Yeah.
So compliance means you have to conform to what I, the person who's the teacher, the service provider, the whomever, the parent, expect you to do, rather than looking at it through a lens of how are you perceiving the world and what do I need to give you to support so that you can live to the best of your abilities. So this is something that I've seen in my mother's work. She's now passed on, but I picked up her master's thesis, when she died, and read it. And she was striving to get people to understand you don't need special toys. You don't need a special this, you don't need a special that. And that's kind of where we are across the lifespan in the world of intellectual and developmental disabilities. So then you add some of those systemic constructs around racial issues, and it makes it even worse, right? So we've got 2 different layers of compliance that are coming down on folks. So for me, what's the biggest thing that gets in the way? It's a combination of compliance culture and ableism. And I'm not going to define ableism for you. You can probably figure that out. But those things are probably the biggest challenges that create all the inequities across every aspect of life, even just going to the grocery store. So, for me, those are the themes of the problems.
And I'll just wrap up really quickly. I think everything that was said before was absolutely and 100% accurate. And it's interesting how these differences play out in different countries, let alone different parts of the state. I mean, the United States is an incredibly complex, diverse network of people. And I myself am working in the more or less the parents that I'm seeing are kind of, they're overwhelmed right off the bat because they just got all of these diagnoses thrown at them and they're probably getting another one like 6 months down the line. And I'm lucky enough to be able to work with a very diverse group of people to address the differences of access between white communities, Black communities, Latino, Hispanic, even Asian Pacific Islander, because you've got them all in Chicago, especially. And you've also got people who have come from food deserts, or people who still live in back of the yards, for example, where it's really not even safe to go outside and play at the high risk of gun violence in the neighborhood. So I feel like from my perspective, I see a lot of inequities happen, especially in the intellectually and developmentally disabled communities and their families, either at the onset, or I shouldn't say onset, or maybe at the onset of their diagnosis, because the pediatrician has so much power in the, great, here's a diagnosis, we can go here, we can go here, we can go there, right? I feel like Robin Williams, like the genie in Aladdin, in case of emergency, the exits are right here, right here, right here, right here, right here. They could do one of those, but more often than not, and especially in underprivileged communities, we get the leaflet, the okay, congratulations, here's all the information you need and go ahead. So we experience that. So parents and caregivers don't always know the exact route to go. And they also don't always have access to the resources needed for their child to thrive. So you take all that and then it's like, eat healthy. Where do you even start? So that's where I experience a lot of inequities, and where I personally get a lot of parents who come to me saying, I didn't even know early intervention was an option. I've had a parent say that to me before, and that to me has been heartbreaking, but it's the reality that we live in.
As you guys are talking, it reminds me, because of that difference, that inequity, and that feeling of being overwhelmed, not knowing what to do. The company that I work for was founded because a family member was diagnosed and the family had no idea of what to do, but they had the resources to them to found this company. And this company was built around one family member, and then they began to take in other clients that needed that assistance. So they were able to offer some of that insight and whatnot. The lady who founded it is a psychologist, and so she stepped away from her practice and founded this business. And she's been such a blessing in the community, and been accessible to help not only her personal family member, but the clients that they have been able to take in. So they've offered that, but that does not happen. I mean, that doesn't happen. That group and the people that they touch are very lucky, but because she did have that insight, they were able to do it for their family, as I said, and for other clients.
I think that's true across the board, Marguerite, that families often drive the solutions in a community. And when that's the case, those solutions are wonderful. And we families do a great job. But also it requires a family of privilege. And that creates a different layer of inequity. A lot of the services available to families, or the parent support groups, et cetera, that create some of those ancillary services or do the advocacy, are families of privilege, and they don't always see those who don't experience the same privileges within the system that they have.
Yeah.
And that's an issue as well.
Many of the clients we serve, of course, only have Medicaid.
Mhm.
Well, and Medicaid runs so much of it, like we now do birth to death, but that just started in 2014. So for all of my son's 33 years, when he was birthed to 18, there was nothing, there was no financial help, there was nothing. You couldn't hire the help that you needed in the home so that you could focus on things. So when you ask me what I do for a living, what we were doing before we started, I currently work for WIC. I'm a training coordinator. And I've done all sorts of, I got my master's in education late in life so that I could get a training related job. And I've done a lot outside of dietetics because dietetics doesn't pay, as Audrey has pointed out very well. But for 30 years, I was a consultant, and all of that good work that I did in intellectual and developmental disabilities was almost free because I couldn't get paid the traditional way. I would just throw my energy into that. And then the rest of my energy was, I was a full-time mom at school. I was adapting the curriculum. I was modifying the day. I was bringing in the extra tools. I was purchasing the assistive technology that he needed. And I didn't have a lot of money to do that. So I would borrow money from my parents, all those things. And I now look at that and I go, I was so privileged that I was able to do that.
Right.
And there were so many people in Andy's experiences and in his classes that whose parents couldn't do that. So if I could make the visual tools for that kid, and the staff didn't have time to do it, but I had the tools at home to do it, I would do it. But yeah, it's the whole support system in those early years and even in adulthood is so dependent on parents having privilege and the ability to do that.
Right. Definitely. Are the resources in England better? Is the reimbursement in England better?
I think that's a question for Marguerite. Okay.
No, it's not, because I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, this is the first time I've been in a room with so many dietitians. Dietitians only come into my space where it's extreme cases. It's unique. Parents have to go through lots of hoops because the gatekeeping in the health sector, if the pediatrician or the doctor's not allowing you to go through, you're not going to get through in terms of doing that. And even if you get to see a dietitian, there's a young girl who's struggling right now with pervasive refusal syndrome where she can't eat and all sorts of things, and there's no treatment for her. So they might even say, okay, you've got ARFID, this is what you've got, but we can't treat you. There's nothing there to be able to give you. So it is difficult. It is difficult. And Joan is absolutely right. It's not just the privilege about the finances, the privilege of the knowledge of knowing who to ask, where to go and to be able to do that. Because those communities that don't be able to are not able to have those conversations, the knowledge stops right there with that leaflet. That's where it stops. Yeah.
Wow. Really good points. Really good.
Hi, can I chime in? This is Valerie Mosier. Let me share my video. I'm from California, and I'm a dietitian working with the IDD population full time, and I've been doing this for 15 years. I don't know if you guys are familiar with California. They have the Lanterman Act, and they have what they call regional centers, and there's 21 of them throughout the state of California. And we focus on serving the IDD population. We serve the autistic community, we serve the Down syndrome community, the intellectually disabled community, and the cerebral palsy community. And so we offer services from anywhere from transportation to housing, to behavior therapy, to OT therapy, to speech therapy. So in California, I know a lot of these families will come to California just because of the regional centers throughout the state. So we are blessed to this population is well served here in California, and they are assigned a caseworker to kind of find whatever needs that they might need. And they get the services there, whether it's they need Medicaid waiver or respite coming to the house. So I'm the dietitian there at Regional Center, serving 58,000 clients. And so it is a blessing. And I don't know what other states do. I've talked to other dietitians and they tell me that it's the county that's responsible for these services. But they are blessed to have the regional centers in California.
Most states run
You're
off of
right.
a county basis, but they also, it's going to depend. California, Oregon, Arizona, and New Mexico, I believe, are the few that are providing K-level services for families on Medicaid services. The vast majority of the states are not providing the K-level services through Medicaid, Valerie, and I think that's an important point to note. You and I come from Oregon, come from states that are in comparison service rich. That's not true for North Carolina, where June is, and Illinois is moving closer. But there's when you go across the United States, there's a real difference between how the systems work. And again, earlier I was talking about how we are managed by the system, and the system is what has the power, and we're compliant to the system if we depend on the system, and most of us do. But it's not equitable across the United States.
Yeah, you're right. You're right, Joan. That's
And
unfortunate. I mean, I wish every state would pick this up. Sorry, June,
Yeah,
go ahead.
that would be an absolute blessing. No, I apologize for interrupting. That would be an absolute blessing to have, because as I said, many of the clients that we have, if they don't have an advocate that is hired by the state, they don't have them. Many of them that I've experienced over the years, their families basically abandon them. And so there aren't even if there is a family, the resource to move to somewhere just to have the resources, they can't, that's not within the cards for them. I think I'm happy for you guys to be blessed. Perhaps that's something we can encourage our legislators and whatnot to think about. It hadn't been on their radar before, but it is desperately needed.
And I think in addition, another thing to consider as dietitians and practitioners is that there's no timeline for grief and acceptance. Right. We have so many, I've worked with an evaluator of autistic children who have had parents walk out of the room before they can even say the A word. It's something that even if we can give all of the resources and all of the recommended information to this family, if they are not ready to hear it, it's so again, I think it speaks to some states are and some areas are just incredibly accepting and welcoming of all children on all ends of the spectrum. And I am lucky enough to be in a part of the country where that's true. And there are other parts of the country and the world where we don't talk about it. We don't think about it. And it's so not only do we have to approach the resources that are required for these children from a legislative perspective, like they do in California, it sounds amazing, but we also have to give parents the resources to congratulations, you have a neurodivergent child. This is what, this is the pathway. This is just one example of what your child's future can look like.
Absolutely. I agree with that, Audrey. I'm in agreement with you, Audrey. Sorry, June, have I cut you? Apologies.
No, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I agree with you. It's about how that information is shared, and it's also what is in the media. Let's look at autism, just because that's the example you gave, Audrey. If autism is seen as a deficit and oh my gosh, your child is going to be this and all of who's going to want to celebrate that? It is not, because it's the information. I've worked with pediatricians, and before you said, you're absolutely right. Before the A word comes out, the language, the body language changes. I'm really sorry, I've got to tell. You're like, hang on a minute, what exactly are you going to say? You know, it's all of how that message is delivered. Then that follow-up work of what does that mean? Your child can still live a meaningful life, absolutely. In regards to that, there is a difference, and how do we embrace those differences? You know, in regards to that, you're absolutely right, Audrey. Thank you so much for bringing that to the attention. June, please go
Yeah.
ahead.
I mean,
No,
it's
I agree
hard, you know,
with
because I'm not a parent, so I can never really say, I understand how you feel. A parent's feelings are a parent's feelings, and they are
Yeah.
allowed to grieve. They are allowed to feel sad, happy, confused, frustrated, whatever it may be. But if at the end of that grieving process, however long it may take, there isn't a wealth of professionals there to say, welcome to the camp, you know, that's what we really need. In my opinion, that's what we really need to focus on. I mean, and myself too, I'm neurodivergent myself. I have OCD and I suffer with trichotillomania. So it's a very, from my end, I'm really able to say, look, I obviously I am different than your child, but I am neurodivergent, and I was able to X, Y, and Z. Of course, it's different for everybody, but it's a very, I think, unique population that we work with. And it has so many layers of emotion, research, logic, medical complexity, science. And I love what I do. And it wouldn't be where we are today if we didn't acknowledge all of the different areas that we receive parents from, where people are coming from. It's important that we, yes, individualize, but also broadly say, this doesn't have to be a death sentence. I mean, it was, you know, autism back in the day was very much I'm so, like you said, Marguerite, I'm so sorry, I have to tell you, but it's luckily we're changing, but we really have to keep it going in that direction.
So I want
No,
to point one thing out.
Yeah.
Sorry. I just want to point out one thing before we go too much farther down this, and that is, when you're looking at IDD, there's this difference between a visible and an invisible disability. And to give you a very poignant example, people who have babies with Down syndrome can easily find positive messaging, positive imagery, and people, when they see you right away, they know you have a child who is different. They may have a wrong idea of what that child's going to be, or what that child might experience, or what you're experiencing, but they still see that difference straight up, right? If a person with an invisible disability, you can be walking along and nobody knows, and they don't understand why they don't turn around when you call their name. And I want to say, like, people who have Down syndrome and autism, the vast majority of us who have kids who fall into both of those buckets, are relieved when we get that autism diagnosis, because our child is developing so differently than the other children with Down syndrome, and we feel we can't figure out why. And we're doing all the things, right? And then we get this other diagnosis and we go, ooh, we got to learn this other thing and go a different way. So it gives us a different, with that visible disability, you have a different strength. But I'm going to pull us back to inequities and racial disparities for a minute.
I'm so sorry, Joan, I saw you raise your hand and I totally ignored it. I'm sorry.
What?
That's on.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, is that June?
No. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Joan. I just realized I saw you raise your hand in the Zoom and I just totally ignored it. So sorry.
Oh,
about
no,
that.
it's okay. I just, when you were talking about the diagnosis, I wanted to do the invisible, because I really want to keep us focused on this racial inequity piece. And that's one of my life stories is reading an article about somebody who was an African-American child who was 13, same age as my kid, a little bit taller, but broad like my kid. And he'd gotten out in the middle of the night in a pair of shorts, no shoes, no shirt. And he was walking down the street and the police saw him, and he was carrying a stick. And so think, 13-year-old kid with autism stick walking along. He's a nonverbal guy, right? Walking along, and he's out of the house and he's just like doing his thing, right? And the police are saying stop and calling to him to stop, and he doesn't stop. And so let's put on all of the prejudices. He's in a different part of town. He's a different color. He's big. He's kind of a refrigerator looking guy. And because he didn't turn around when they said stop, instead of trying to come around and get in front of him or get a little closer and kind of figure it out, they tased him like 15 times. And so our family's response to that when we read it in the paper wasn't one of, oh, that's because he was a Black kid. It was, oh my God, it's because he had autism and he couldn't follow commands, verbal commands. So the last people we want to call are the police. And the same is going to be true in healthcare settings, right? You know, I mean, we come in and if they respond differently, we as the healthcare providers, you know, when I come into urgent care, because I got goo coming out of my ear for my kid, and we can't get a stethoscope on him, and he goes like this, instead of respecting that he's saying, give me space, they think he's going to hit him. So what happens if he's a Black kid and he goes like this, right? So I kind of want to bring us back to that racial inequity and healthcare and all of that, because it's like super important for dietitians to understand when they're providing services, all of the things that can play into that moment. Lost Marissa.
I'm sorry. That is a
Oh, there
great
she
way to
is.
tie it back in. And I think we've already gone on to the next question, and that's a really great segue, which is, you know, whether you work with racially, ethnically diverse clients and commenting on some of their unique experiences. So that might not have been your client, but that was definitely a unique experience. So I'll, let me see, June is trying to get back in, so I will go ahead and let her come back.
I was a little bit confused about that question when you said about unique experiences of racially or ethnic diverse set of clients. Can I ask what you're trying to, what's the question, what you're trying to ascertain, and then I'm going to respond based on what you answer.
Right, absolutely. So the question is sort of, we already understand that there are challenges that one would experience having disabilities. So are there additional challenges for that intersectionality that you've either seen in your clients that are, you know, in a racial minority group, or like Joan said, and just that you've heard in general, that you've seen that there are additional challenges from having an intellectual disability, developmental disability, and also being in a minority racial ethnic group?
Are you talking, okay, so are you saying then, when you said unique, I'm not sure, are you talking about the negative experiences? Because we know that the intersectionality of racism and atheism is double oppression. We know that. So I'm just trying to work out, are you asking, because it can be quite triggering if you say, I'm trying to understand, because I wasn't clear about the question. I weren't sure where you come from. So let everybody else speak and let me see if I can then chime in.
Right.
I'm sure I've got lots to talk about, but I'll listen to everybody else first. So I'm still a bit unsure. Please.
The clients, for example, that I serve at Family Affair Care Group, and we're going to have an open conversation. The clients that tend to be Caucasian do have more benefits. They do have more family support. We just admitted a lady to the group home. She has worked her life. Her family comes to picks her up. She wears beautiful clothes, shopped at higher end stores, that kind of thing. The clients that are African American tend to their families have less to offer, except for the one young lady whose family, like I said, started the business because she was born. She is African American. And the group home was built, the group homes, more than one, was built up around her. The Hispanic gentleman that is there, and we've had several of those, his family is there because he has a large family. He does have a lot of family support, but he doesn't have a lot of benefits. His mom works. She doesn't see him often. Then, of course, like I said, there's that other group that regardless of what your ethnicity is, if your family, and that was a part of the conversation when my cell service, I apologize, in this area is not the best. And it did something in my bandwidth, let me down. But then there's this population, regardless of your ethnicity, if your family can accept the fact that you have a diagnosis, then either they're going to go through that grieving process that we were talking about. And we also have to accept the fact that some people can't accept the diagnosis. And those are the ones that are often given to a group home such as mine. And then they have those, they are the award of the state because the family could not accept that diagnosis. And then all you have is what Medicaid and that state person gives you. And if you've got a advocate that is caring, that is into it because they care about the population and that kind of thing, then they're more involved. There are those who the system, they're overwhelmed with the number of patients that they have to care for and that they have to be the advocate for. And we don't get to see them and talk with them as often as we'd like to. But because you are a ward of the state, because like I say, the family could not accept the diagnosis. So that's where you are. And that gets past racial and into the socioeconomic, because if you had the fiscal resources, then the person could probably pay for those caregivers and that kind of thing to care for those family members. But because fiscally you can't afford that, then if you cannot accept the diagnosis, then they have been abandoned.
I agree, Jean. So what you've just described then is the stigma that's attached in, and that cultural and spiritual lack of understanding, the shame that's been brought in certain communities that you've got a disabled child, so we can't accept that here. So yes, definitely I've experienced that with families that I've worked with, 100%. Not in the sense of that the children have been given up or become a child of the state as you've described it, but there are children that's still in their families but that do struggle, absolutely, definitely, to accept that diagnosis.
Yeah, on a personal note, one of the things I admired most about my husband's mother, my mother-in-law, she had a child. She had a child. She's passed on, that is autistic. And she accepted the challenge because she loves her child and she's a professional mother. She never believed that there wasn't a child that she could not parent. And that to me was very amazing, regardless of who the child and what the circumstance was. She never thought that. There is a very affluent family in the neighborhood, and when they received the diagnosis that their only child was autistic, the mom could not accept that. And the pediatrician came to my husband's mother and asked her if she would be willing to accept that child into her home. And she did. So she had 2 boys that are autistic at the same time, and she raised both of them called her mom. They're a brother to the family more than anything else. She very seldom saw his birth parents. I can't speak to what support they gave her financially or whatever, but she adored that young man and she did everything she could. And they were from a African-American affluent family, but they could not accept that diagnosis.
So maybe some cultural or something within that community that you think may have been at play with the refusal.
Yeah, because they wanted their child to be able to do the things that the other children within his circle were doing. because as I said, they were very affluent, but rather than, they could not accept the diagnosis. So yes, the stigma, as we say, that was attached to that. Yeah, it was, but he very happy. When my husband and I started dating, she was sending him to the prom. He took, one of the young ladies at the high school took a beautiful picture with him, had a good time at the prom. So he's very happy. Is in a group home now and works and is doing very well, very well.
That's good to hear.
That's amazing too. And I was just reminded of a client that I worked with a few years ago who was adopted from Lithuania. Parents knew he had Down syndrome. They did not know he had autism, was brought to the US, was, starting all the services and everything. But it was very clear from the baby book that his parents received when he was at this orphanage in Lithuania, it was incredibly underfunded. It was abysmally, I mean, the children with special needs there were neglected on purpose. He did not roll over when the other babies did. He did not learn to speak when the other babies did. And his Down syndrome made chewing and swallowing very difficult with the low muscle tone in his mouth. So he did not progress to solids as quickly. And when he came to us, his family was very supportive, but I was on his team because he engaged in overstuffing behavior, because the food that he would eat, he shoveled in his mouth, because frankly, it was taken away if he didn't eat by himself after a number of minutes. So it's interesting.
So he was pocketing? I apologize for interrupting. He was pocketing?
So he learned to pocket eventually, but he came to us with just, there's no other word I can describe other than inhale. He shoveled the food in his mouth and just let it fall down his throat without really, I mean, he swallowed eventually, but my role was sort of take 3 bites, hands on table for 3, 2, 1, hands on spoon. And it was a very, very slow, but very, very rewarding process, because he did eventually learn because he couldn't bite. I mean, that's sort of where the speech therapist comes in, and the OT comes in, and the BT comes in, and the DT comes in, and the social worker comes in. And it's just this wonderful network that we have that definitely was not, and exactly, Joan, responding to that lack of access that he had, especially in Eastern Europe, where disabilities are some of the most frowned upon things you could ever imagine. And so, and that bias directly translates to a lack of resources, a lack of awareness, a lack of really promoting his individual progress. So he's doing great. His adoption coordinator actually came over from Lithuania for his kindergarten graduation, and it was just the most wonderful thing. She said, the world leaders could all be gathering in Chicago and I wouldn't care, because this is the event of the year, and it's wonderful. It's good meeting people, but it's so different in every part of the world.
They're really great points of like specific cultural, and just mentioning like how that culture doesn't really accept disabilities and how that affected. So it's a really great point, Audrey. We're running a little low on time, and I know we just got through a couple questions. Does anyone want to add more on that, or maybe talk about things that would be helpful for dietitians to know working with people with disabilities, kind of as a closing thought?
I have one thing I want to toss out there that's really global for our dietitians. And that is, we do a wonderful job in our training of learning about what we call motivational interviewing. And there's a framework for motivational interviewing. If you dig deeper, you will get to something that's called person-centered practices. And there's a National Center for Person-Centered Practices that's funded by the Administration on Community Living. But I would really encourage you to spend some time learning about person-centered thinking and person-centered practices. In the UK, there's a group called Helen Sanderson that does a very nice job with it. Because if you can really embrace that and really embrace listening with the intent to hear, acting on what you hear, and being honest about what you can and can't do when you're working with families, working with children, working with adults, and put your therapy hat on in all of that, you're going to do a wonderful job with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. But until you can get in there and start to really, really do the, and I don't want to use empathy because it's not empathy, you're really listening. And sometimes listening is behavior. Listening is a reaction. Listening is words. Listening is sounds. Listening is waiting a minute for a response. When you can do that, your skills and your training as a dietitian really sets you up for being very, very good at this. But you have to really embrace the philosophy and the behavioral component of it for it to work. So blending all of that together is really the key to this work, regardless of age. And regardless of ethnicity, regardless of everything. Because if you're truly listening with the intent to hear, you'll be able to hear what that person's saying. You'll hear their trauma. You'll hear all the things, all of the barriers that we've been talking about will come up. So I just want that's my like thing that I try to get out there and pound into dietitians' heads, because we're really well suited for this.
Yeah, I can jump in there. I'd say yes, active listening, absolutely. Meet the child or the young person that you're working where they're at. Everybody's journey is different, and you know, you guys are clinicians, and I'm not a clinician. I'm seen as a professional because I'm a teacher, but they might not be where we're at. So we need to be using language that they're able to understand, that we're able to communicate with, that they understand at that point what you're talking about. You know, for example, your dietitian show, cultural food, what does that mean? So I'm going to talk about my heritage. I'm from a Jamaican heritage. The families that I work with who may have come from a Jamaican culture, it's our Sunday dinner is a specific type of dinner at times. And there are children who are autistic who have these difficulties with food that can't engage in those meals. And that can be seen as quite difficult for those parents who come around the dinner table. You know, we're expected to act in a certain way. And if that doesn't happen, shame on you. You know, what are you doing? What kind of parent are you? So it's just about understanding that. So I do believe that ethnicity does play a part and culture does, because those families might not be able to communicate that with you. It might be that active listening that they're telling you in a certain way without telling you. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, in regards to doing that. I'd also say connect with other professionals. Now, it's nice to hear that you are working a multidisciplinary team. That doesn't necessarily happen here. It's not as unique as what you said, dietitian, speech and language, OT. In some special schools and in some special places, in places that you might find that, but it's not common practice. In regards to that, think about your positioning in relation to how you may be perceived. Your positioning is very, very important because it could be seen as a place of power. And if you can reduce that power and have those conversations quite late, like, I think it will be beneficial for your, and please understand this, I'm not saying that you don't do that already, because you probably do, but it's just because the question was, what can we do in regards to do that? And also just to add that an anti-racist and intersectional approaches is a lifelong journey. It's something that we'll consistently be doing, and it needs to be embedded in your practices at all times. Just because a family is unable, because I don't like to use the word doesn't engage, is unable to engage, doesn't mean that they won't engage at some point. We have to keep trying, because at some point we will be able to give them the tools to be able to participate in the services that are available to them. Thank you.
Audrey or June, do you have any additional thoughts, closing thoughts about
I think,
Share.
no, I think Marguerite summed it up beautifully. It's
Joan did
anti-racism
a
work
beautiful
is
job.
Anti-racism work is a lifelong process, and we as dietitians are required to be part of it, because the at the end of the day, different people have different levels of access, and it tends to be Black and brown people who do not have as good of access to the foods they need to thrive and succeed, and don't have access to professionals who are aware of their cultural practices, such as, I mean, brown rice versus white rice in the Latino community. It's literally as simple as that. And it requires, I try to follow, I mean, as juvenile as it may sound, I love Instagram, and I find a lot of really great practitioners who are dietitians and licensed family therapists and psychologists who are of different skin colors. I make an effort to follow them and understand what they recommend and why. That's something that I like to do, and they come out with different book recommendations that I really enjoy. There are ways that as dietitians we can do the work and still have a good practice, and it's our responsibility to do so.
I agree, and thank you. Very nicely said, yes.
Great. So I wanted to thank all of y'all for just sharing so much about your experience, personal, professional. Just you guys are such a wealth of knowledge, and I was over here jotting down notes. So I wanted to thank you all so much for participating in this.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you
Yes.
very much for having us.
Thank you
Please
for
stay
this
in
discussion.
contact.
Yeah,
Jane,
absolutely.
Jean,
Yeah.
stay in contact, because even if we can do international connections of work, the only people that are going to benefit are the children and the families.
Yes.
Absolutely. Let's just keep it going. So, in fact, thank you so much, Marissa, for bringing us together. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank
Marissa,
you,
I just want
Marissa.
to commend you for doing this, because this is a discussion just even about intellectual and developmental disability that has been needed for as long as I've been a dietitian.
Yep.
To just talk about the difference, and then to look at the intersectionality even better. So thank you for having the forethought to do that.
Yes.
Thanks. Yay. I will post a recording of this to our BHN group and also on our YouTube channel. So that'll have more access outside of our group. So hopefully everyone who wasn't able to join will be able to benefit from everything that you guys have shared.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
With that, I'll say goodbye to everyone and have a wonderful day or whatever is
Yes.
left of it for us.
Good morning, good night, good
Good
evening.
morning, day.
Yes.
Add me on LinkedIn if you guys are on. Have a good day.
You too.